Okay. Great. So we can start. First of all, I'll start with who I am. I'm one of the data stewards at the VUB, Vrije Universiteit Brussel, and today I will talk about open science and research data management in the context of inclusion. And this presentation is a part of the EUTOPIA Day. And you can always reach me after this presentation also via the email address research.datamanagement@vub.be. So yes, let's start with today's outline. It's very short. First, I will give an introduction to open science and research data management in general, and then define the inclusion in the context of these two terms. And then we will look together into the open science and research data management being barriers or enablers for inclusion. But keep in mind, this is an interactive session, so feel free to keep asking questions in the Q&A section. I will answer them regularly. And I have also added some questions here and there that will pop up on the screen, and please answer those questions from your point of view in the chat. So let's make this as interactive as possible. So the first question is, what made you register to this session? If you can just write a few words in the chat, that would be nice for me. No pressure. I will wait a few seconds. If I don't see anything, I will just move forward. Okay, I see people writing, so I'm going to wait. Okay. Yeah. Someone says, I just heard about EUTOPIA and wanted to know more about it and the projects. Yeah. I don't know if this presentation will answer that question, but it is certainly something that we do very often in the context of EUTOPIA, focusing on open science, research data management, as well as the other projects that are going on within EUTOPIA. And someone else says, I manage research data repository at our university and interested in promoting the use of research data among colleagues. So any input in this direction is welcome. You're in the right place. I will, although this session focuses on a specific aspect of research data management and open science, there will be a lot of resources, especially at the end. So stick till the end, and then feel free to ask any questions that come up during the presentation as well. Okay, let's move on. Let's start with the question, what is open science? Open science involves a lot of different aspects, subcategories, and most people associate it with open access to published research results and making your research results open access. Open peer review is another one where, you know, the identities of the people who have reviewed your work, so it's non-blinded. Open research data and software. So when you publish your research results, you can make sure that you are transparent about the underlying data that led you to those results. Open protocols is one of them. Citizen science is one of them. Uh, Open software, open code is one of them. It's not written here, but yeah, there are lots of other different aspects to it. And so I would like you to think of open science with this broad definition in mind today. And it is becoming, open science is becoming the new normal, especially in European policies. Rest of the world is kind of following us. But at the moment, yeah, you can see in like national policies and EU level policies that open science is becoming a major impactful aspect of scientific research. And it is based on values such as reproducibility, transparency, collaboration, basically many of the things that would lead to better science, quote unquote. And why is it important? Although I said it a second ago, I will repeat it. Open science is science done right, and it has different aspects in achieving that. An example is the increase of transparency and accountability, so that you give others the chance to scrutinize and verify your results, which enhances your credibility and integrity. It boosts collaboration and innovation because others are more able to reach to what you have published. It improves reproducibility, of course. That is a very important thing in ensuring robustness of scientific knowledge. It is related to efficient use of resources. If you are more transparent in sharing your work and the background of it, including the methodology, the data, how you did the analysis, so on and so forth, it prevents duplication. Others can, instead of redoing the same thing that you did without knowing that someone else in the world did it, build on the existing work. And these are just a few examples. Let's quickly go through the FAIR principles. Probably you have heard of these before, but just in case, when we talk about open science and open data, especially in terms of research data, FAIR principles are cited very often, and the FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And these have to do with, for instance, metadata, registering your metadata online so that others can find them, making your publications or data or protocols accessible. This does not mean that you have to share everything openly, but at least you let the world know that you have something, even if it's restricted. And if, for example, a very legitimate interest in accessing that thing comes, this can be evaluated in legal and ethical terms, and access could be given in theory. Interoperable means that, yeah, your data set could be opened in another device using another software. It can be combined with other data sets, so on and so forth. So it's not just like a standalone thing that only that is only consultable in that like particular little form. So open formats come into place in this one. And finally, reusable. So all of these, all of the three that I mentioned, make the data more reusable. And for reusability also, you need very good documentation. If you just, let's say, publish a data set with numbers without ever mentioning what the numbers stand for, then it's unusable. You have published open data, but it means nothing to the rest of the world. It's not reusable. It's means nothing. So these are the FAIR principles. In the meantime, I see that there is a question in the Q&A. Yeah, sorry, that was Kate writing, ask your questions. Okay, let's go forward. Yeah, I explained most of these there. And the last thing I said is just repeat it here. Open data or open access, open whatever is not enough. And I have a very nice quote here. I will read that out loud. Our own experience from opening up vast volumes of data is that openness cannot simply be tacked on as an afterthought at the end of scientific endeavor. Besides, openness alone does not guarantee reproducibility or reusability. So it should not be pursued as a goal in itself. Focusing on data is also not enough. It needs to be accompanied by software, workflow, explanations, all of which need to be captured throughout the usual iterative and closed research lifecycle, ready for a timely, open release with the results. So as I said, open data doesn't mean much on its own unless the data are also fair. And this is the nice middle point where the two come together. A quick introduction on research data management now. So how can we define research data? Well, at VUB, we define it as all digital and physical objects, regardless of how they are collected or stored, as long as they are used or analyzed to support research findings and validate research results, or they underlie a reasoning or discussion or calculation in research. So we have a very broad definition of research data. And some examples are like raw versus analyzed, digital versus digitized analog, primary versus secondary data. These are more technical terms regarding the process the data went through. But otherwise, you can think of videos, books, images, physical artifacts, code. Think broad when it comes to research data. And research data, defining your research data and pinpointing what your research data is the first step even before planning in the data life cycle. That starts with planning your research, continues with collecting and processing, analyzing data during research, and then you preserve your data and share your data if you can, or preserve it in restricted access in case a legitimate and legal and ethically appropriate request comes in to share it with particular people. And then at the end, reusing data. This is what we call research data lifecycle. And the research data lifecycle is often what you need to think about in advance and write about when you write a data management plan, which is becoming more and more mainstream for funders to ask for. And data management plan is a living document, which means that you can change it, what you wrote in it throughout your research. And it asks you about your data documentation, the legal and ethical obligations, whether you are aware of them or not. Are you aware of where you can store your data during and after research, whether you can share it or not, so on and so forth. So I'm not going to go too much into data management plan, but I have to mention it because we talk about research data management. And why do you need it, a DMP? Well, in everything, just like in everything that you do, if you plan in advance how you're going to handle something and execute something, you save time while doing it. And in the case of research data, you can also avoid data loss or unnecessary data horrors, like let's say you forget your computer on the train and somebody is able to access your data that includes personal data of your participants, and then you are the cause of data breach, for instance. So you want to avoid those situations. And those are repeated here. Why is RDM important? So that you can properly back up your data, so that you can take clear notes of your research procedures, and then 2 years later, not look at a spreadsheet and say, okay, I measured the distance here, but is it miles or kilometers? I don't remember that. So it is a gift that you give to yourself as you document things, not being a cause, a reason for a data breach, and not not being in a situation where you have lots of files saying data underscore final, data underscore final final, data underscore final final, real final. That just is a mess. So for these reasons, you need to pay attention to research data management. I will skip this slide because we already talked about it. So let's get to the core of the business, the inclusion in today's webinar. So how can we define inclusion? Again, for this, I went for the broadest possible definition. And in the context of this webinar, I would like to define inclusion as an intentional design so that people and institutions with different resources, languages, legal contexts, identities, and histories can participate in, contribute to, benefit from, and be credited by open science and RDM practices. So it's very broad. To summarize it a bit, you can think of inclusion being equal to equitable participation, access, and benefit from open science and RDM across the whole research data life cycle that we just talked about. And of course, when you define inclusion so broadly, there are many dimensions to consider as well. There are like financial aspects, like article processing costs, storage costs. There's this dimension of geography and infrastructure. Where are you in the world? Are you in Global South? Are you in EU? What kind of resources do you have access to? Language and the use of language in metadata. you can consider the career stage of the researcher and the impact of contributing to inclusion on your recognition and evaluation as a researcher. There is this aspect of disability and accessibility. There is this aspect to cultural data sovereignty. You go collect the data about a certain group of people without them having much say about what you are saying to the outside world about them, for instance. And very obvious one is a legal or regulatory aspect, GDPR, that applies in the EU, but not outside of the EU. So on and so forth. There's like sky's the limit to the dimensions that you can think of. And obviously, I can't go through all of them. But in the meantime, I would like to ask you to drop in the chat if you think of anything else than these, to please contribute so we can make the list even longer, and maybe in the future we can get to an all-encompassing list, who knows. So open science and RDM as barriers to inclusion. And before I start talking about that, I would like to ask you, how do you think open science or RDM create barriers for inclusion? Just drop it in the chat, and I will wait a few seconds for this, but not too long, and go forward. In the meantime, drop of water. Someone writes, yeah, language or English only. The very discipline-specific terms. Yeah, or very discipline-specific terms, indeed. Only considering variables of dominant groups in data collection. Yes. Yeah, putting the white researcher in the center, a white researcher in Europe in the center kind of thing, indeed. So I will go forward, but as other replies come in, I will also read those out loud. But before I write anything, before I say anything else, I would like us to remember the context of open science. What is the point of open science? Why does open science exist in the first place? And to me, open science movement is a response to like structural dysfunctions in academia. What are these? Competition, lack of time, lack of transparency, the well-known, the famous or infamous reproducibility crisis, pressure to perform, publishing for free. That is something we cannot really explain to our families if they're not academics themselves. Yeah, you publish an article and you get nothing for it, and plus you have to pay money to get it published. They ask these kind of questions. So these make no sense to people outside of academia, and open science is supposed to be a remedy to these, to actively challenge the current system. So that is the context I would like to give. But in the meantime, I see another message in the chat. Not sure about the legal status of collected data after the passing of the author. Yes, if there is no explicit paperwork. Does the family inheritors have any say? Okay, let's get to that question towards the end, because it has less to do with the inclusion part, but more to do with the legal side of things. So if you don't mind, I will get back to that later. So in terms of barriers that are caused by open science, the most important thing that comes to people's mind, in my experience, is that we have institutional mandates to promote open science that don't really match with practical realities. For instance, we have unrealistic expectations from funders or institutions that everyone starts applying open science principles without enough support or legal guidance. Just like this question that came. We are supposed to make people share their data without knowing, oh, what happens when somebody dies. Another one is not thinking of the resources needed. You need time from people to learn and apply open science practices. You need them to train for it. You need to provide them good infrastructure to be able to do it. And you need to be able to pay for all of those things. So if you just expect people to apply open science without giving them money for it, yeah, of course, it's not going to happen. And that brings me to token open science mandates without considering if they would really be useful. You just keep burdening sometimes academics with the KPIs they're supposed to reach to, key performance indicators, without thinking through whether they would be useful or whether the open science requirements would conflict with legal or ethical considerations. So these are just a few of the things that are bothering many researchers when it comes to open science being a barrier versus enabler of inclusion. And there's this concept of open washing, and I want to just talk about very shortly, that is derived from greenwashing, fake ecological concern. And this open washing is a fake, basically, open science concern. It's a practice of presenting research policies or institutions as open. We are transparent, we are participatory or fair compliant, without implementing the very necessary background, structural, cultural, or practical changes necessary to support openness in a sustainable way. And yeah, in short, openness being performative without having a meaningful impact. And some characteristics of open washing are, just like I said a few moments ago, mandating open access without funding, requiring open data without providing training or infrastructure, promoting open science in strategy documents, but then not translated to rewarding researchers for their efforts, and treating basically openness as a branding exercise instead of a global systemic transformation. And these bring me to open science being a barrier to inclusion if it is not seen as a long-term change that we need to make globally to have it sustainably in place. The first one that comes to mind for many people is the article processing charges to publish your publications in open access, in gold open access, which damages the spirit of open science. And there's a lot of research that shows that being able to afford these article processing charges, correlating with, of course, being part of wealthier institutions, being a researcher in a wealthier field or discipline, for instance, medical science versus humanities. Another one is infrastructure and access gaps. We, from the European side, we are, of course, more privileged. We have initiatives such as EOSC, Open Air, and many other things at the European level, or sometimes, if we are lucky, at the national level. But in many other parts of the world, you have to deal with realities like low bandwidth, limited local storage, lack of shared computing resources for data-intensive science. So we rarely think about who can access the things that we can just upload so easily on the web. Another one that came in the chat is language or metadata bias. The English being the lingua franca of the times, and the metadata of most resources are just shared in English. But maybe the data that is underlying that research come from an indigenous community or a community that has a total different language, but we don't even think about that community having access to the results we derive from their data that they gave us. Again, we talked about the funders and the budget situation, that some funders and institutions still do not recognize how much open science and inclusion would cost in time. Inclusion costs money. Open science costs money. Time of researchers costs money. So if these are not fully compensated, but just more demands keep coming on researchers, of course, this is a barrier to inclusion. And FAIR principles that I just talked about a few minutes ago, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable metadata and documentation and data and publications, these improve, of course, the machine and human reuse of a given data set, publication, whatever. But FAIR is not enough. We also need care for inclusion. And let me introduce the principle of care very shortly. Care stands for collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics. And it came out in the context of indigenous data governance, but you can, of course, broaden this to a much larger aspect. For instance, do we even stop and think about improved citizen engagement for equitable outcomes of our research? Or do we pay attention to the rights and interests of the communities that we do research about? How are we using our research data and research publications to expand capacity and capability? And how do we think about maximizing benefit and minimizing harm? Do we think about justice? Do we think about future reuse of what we produce? So if we think of all of those things, we will all see that just making something findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable would not be even enough. And both of these concepts, for both of these concepts, sky is the limit. We can just keep improving, improving, improving. We can never say we got there. I am now 100% fair or care compliant. Okay, now that I gave you a lot of bad news, a lot of like negative context about open science and RDM being barriers for inclusion, let's start talking about these two concepts becoming enablers for inclusion. And before I do that, again, I would like you to think about it a bit and let me know in the chat if you have any ideas about how open science and research data management can enable more inclusion. Okay. Access could be wider, easier for researchers from the global south. Yes. And how can that be? If use really open platforms like Zenodo to shift away from the traditional publications which are behind paywalls or charge huge fees. Yes, exactly. So keep writing in the chat as new ideas come to mind, but I will start also giving my ideas in the meantime. So it is not always easy to separate research data management completely from open science because they're very closely linked. But just for the sake of making a distinction, I listed some practical tips for RDM and then some for open science. Well, first things first, we can start with building inclusion into the data management plan itself. Like we can mention how participants and stakeholders are involved from and turn them from these passive subjects to be studied into participants, co-researchers that do the research with you. And that will also include the language choices, the accessibility choices that we make, the licensing, the stewardship, what are we going to share with them, what not. We can start with paying more attention to this aspect already before the research starts at the data management planning stage. A very related one, community engagement and co-design, if possible, instead of imposing, okay, this is how the research is going to be done, and you will just give me what I need. We can use tiered access and the governance for sensitive data. So this comes in the context of as open as possible, as closed as necessary. We should be including metadata where possible and have controlled access where necessary, as needed in terms of legal or ethical circumstances. And in case a sensitive data set gets enough interests from another researcher to be shared with them, if a request comes, then we can discuss further with the data access committee, or make a data use agreement to take that further. The thing that we were talking about before, making metadata and documentation, if possible, multilingual and accessible. This can be, you don't have to translate every single thing. It could be just a short abstract provided in another language, and paying more attention to machine readable metadata that could be used regardless of whatever language the documentation is, because metadata is more structured and machine usable. Controlled vocabularies, using controlled vocabularies and taking it even one step further, the controlled vocabularies in multiple languages where the translations are, I have to say, recognized by people, by researchers that are conducting their research in different languages. Another one is, of course, crediting and rewarding the contributions of people who curate the data, the community partners, academic or non-academic contributors to authorship, and also the efforts of researchers who go above and beyond to make their data and publications extra accessible, extra open, better documented. So seeing that, recognizing that, and rewarding that is very important. Preferring open and non-proprietary infrastructures and formats. Let's say you did your analysis in SPSS, which is a paid software, but without assuming that anywhere in the world people would be so ready to pay the fee to have access to the software. So sharing your data set in a format that can be opened and used in different using different softwares, open source softwares that causes lower technical barriers. And finally, considering the volume of data that need to be downloaded, thinking about the bandwidth question. So the technical infrastructure being much more problematic in other countries than we have in Europe, and giving a thought about it. What can you do about it? You can bundle together the essentials and then separate the nice to haves from the essentials bucket to give people the choice. Okay, if I can only download one of these, which one do I go for? Or even making data even smaller as sample packages, making compressed subsets, or providing very good documentation along the full data set to give people enough context beforehand so that they can choose whether they want to invest their limited bandwidth into downloading the entire thing. So there are several things to be done here, but it is something that is not discussed much today when we talk about open science. We just go for open, share everything. But if you are there sharing a 1 gigabyte data set, who are you helping? Who are you excluding? Giving a thought about that. So those were about data side of things. And then I have some practical tips that I bundle under open science because they go beyond the research data question. And it starts with budget inclusion upfront. So researchers being able to ask money for things like translations, stewardship, the cost of repositories, workshops, so that they can execute open science principles without having to sacrifice themselves and their time to make it possible. We talked about this already, using fair and care principles as combined, because FAIR focuses on the technical accessibility and inclusion, while care focuses more on people, purpose, and rights. Promoting and making use of diamond open access publishing, or at least green, which will help us to reduce reliance on article processing charges and gold open access, and do the things that only rich universities and rich fields can do, and favoring repository deposits and preprints. And I will give a bit more information on preprints in the coming slides. It's shortly a complete draft of a scholarly paper that authors post publicly before or while it undergoes formal peer review in a journal. So a preprint is discoverable, citable, and updatable, but not yet peer-reviewed. And the key features are that that they are posted on a preprint server. There are several of them that are mentioned here. Often a DOI or a persistent identifier is assigned to them, and these can be versioned as the author works on the preprint. And the benefits are the speed. You can immediately share research results. You can get very quickly the credit for the research that you've done. You can start getting feedback from community. You can already find collaborators who want to work further on the question with you, and they are obviously open access. But then there are some risks and caveats to preprints. Well, they're not peer-reviewed, so nobody had checked in theory that if the results are scientifically robust. The publisher policies still vary, even though most journals accept submissions of work that were posted as preprints. A few journals still say, no, if this ever came out before, I don't even consider it for my journal. So you need to check the policies first. And for some fields, there could be a media misinterpretation. For instance, the researchers found that X and Y causes cancer, for instance. Like if before rigorous peer review happens, before you share such results, it can cause potential harm. But this is not relevant for most researchers, I would say. And to finish off on a positive note, there are good things happening as well, especially at the EU level. We have a platform called Open Research Europe, for instance, that is an open science publishing platform, especially for European Commission funded projects. And a new initiative has started, European Diamond Capacity Hub. This is about making diamond open access more of the norm than than the odd thing that some people do in the background. These are just two examples to a lot of other positive things that are going on, like all of the infrastructure that are being developed in the context of EOSC, for instance, or OpenAir, so on and so forth. So change is happening for inclusion, slowly but surely, and we as researchers can, of course, contribute more to that. And one of my last questions, please write it in the chat if you want. Which of the tips I gave earlier sound most actionable to you and easiest to apply to you? And what would you start implementing first from today or tomorrow onwards? And then I'll wait a few seconds and wrap the session. But before wrapping up, I will answer the question about the legal situation of collective data after the passing of the author. Well, if there is no explicit paperwork. Now, that is a problematic case. If you are collecting personal data from someone, you need to have explicit paperwork, namely the informed consent. You need to have the informed consent form signed by the person giving you the information about themselves that gives you the right to process their personal data. The only exception to this would be the public interest, where you say, for instance, I'm not going to ask this person even their informed consent about whether I can note and process the information about their oxygen saturation because they are a COVID patient and COVID is a pandemic going on and I need data ASAP. I don't have time for informed consents. I can bypass it, and this is why I can bypass it. This is an example of using public interest as legal ground to collecting personal information. And I'm saying these without being a legal expert, of course, as a data steward. So first of all, you need the explicit paperwork. And secondly, GDPR, the protection of personal data, that only applies to living persons. So the moment they pass, they don't come under the protection of their personal data. But there are lots of exceptions and other things to consider. I would suggest you take this further with a legal expert. And of course, there is this like family and inheritors having any say about that. If you say certain things about a person who is already who has already passed some decades ago, but if the information that you share about that person would ruin the reputation of a family member that is still alive, that is a complicated situation also, because there are like living people being affected. So these kind of complex issues should be checked with the experts. I can only give you the very basics. In the meantime, I got some responses. Thank you. The plain language summary is interesting, and preprints, if acceptable for EU-funded projects. Yeah. I think the fair care distinction was very interesting, and the fact that we can never become 100% inclusive or fair, but should continue our work in any case. Indeed. The ones related to bandwidth, never thought about it. I'm happy you write this, because I thought the exact same thing when someone else first mentioned this to me. Yeah. Okay. So quickly wrapping up, what are you taking away from this session? If you would like to share, please do in the chat. And in the meantime, I can give you a bit more resources going forward. Well, I would suggest you to check out the VU-based Zenodo community library. We have a lot of interesting resources there. Some examples are a complete course about reproducibility of research. We have guidelines for responsible use of AI for research, for instance. We have a pre-registration guide. We have lots of slide decks about basics of metadata and documentation and data repositories, so on and so forth. So check out this Zenodo link. And if you have any questions or feedback, please do reach us via the email research.datamanagement@vub.be. Otherwise, this is the end of my presentation, unless you have questions. You are very welcome. Yeah. Feel free to contact me for any further questions. So in the meantime, let's stop recording in case we want to open up the videos and audios for questions.